مساكم الله بالخير مشاهدينا الكرام، حيكم في هذه الحلقة الجديدة من برنامج تحت المجهر. المدن الإيطالية اسقطت تباعا وكأننا في مشهد حرب. جثث بالمئات تنقل بالشاحنات العسكرية في مشهد مأساوي ما مر على إيطاليا منذ الحرب العالمية الثانية. أكثر من 124 ألف إصابة. عدد الوفيات تعدى 15 ألف وفاة. العالم اليوم كله يعيش أزمة وباء كورونا، لكن ما نبالغ إذا قلنا أن أزمة إيطاليا تحديداً الأكثر تعقيداً صحياً واقتصادياً وحتى سياسياً. حلقتنا اليوم راح تكون من إيطاليا وتحديداً من ميلان، عاصمة الفن والأزياء العالمية اللي صارت بين ليلة وضحاها أكبر بؤرة منكوبة في إيطاليا تفشى فيها فيروس كورونا. راح نستضيف أستاذ علم الجراثيم في جامعة ميلان واستشاري علم الفيروسات الكلينيكي البروفيسور كارلو بيرنو، وأيضا راح تكون معنا مداخلة سريعة من السفير الإيطالي في الكويت حتى نتعرف أكثر إيش قاعد يصير في إيطاليا. لكن قبل كل هذا خلوني أرحب بزميلي راح يشاركني في تقديم هذه الحلقة، الأستاذ المشارك في كلية الطب بجامعة الكويت الدكتور محمد جمال. دكتور محمد مساء الخير.
مساء نور أبو عبد العزيز.
حلقتنا اليوم راح تكون عن إيطاليا. إيطاليا ما نبالغ إذا قلنا اليوم تعيش، يعني العالم كله يمكن يعيش حالة مأساوية، لكن بالفعل إيطاليا اليوم تعيش أكبر حالة مأساوية يمكن على مستوى أوروبا على الأقل، خلينا نقول.
نعم طبعا الأرقام جدا مرتفعة في إيطاليا، الآن هي تقريبا رقم 2 في العالم بعد الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. نسبة الوفيات، هذه نقطة مهمة، نسبة الوفيات مرتفعة في إيطاليا لسبب ما، وكذلك من المهم أن نستفيد أن نتعلم من الدروس اللي صارت في إيطاليا. الأرقام بدأت تقل قليلا هذه الأيام، فهناك بعض الأمل،
خصوصا أن إيطاليا تعتبر من الدول الأولى اللي اجتاحها الوباء بعد الصين.
نعم طبعا وحتما هناك الكثير من الأمور اللي ممكن نستفيد منها في هذه المقابلة.
خلينا في البداية نشوف التقرير على ما يجهز الاتصال الأول مع السفير الإيطالي في الكويت. طيب دكتور محمد، احنا على ما يجهز ايضا اتصالنا اللي راح يكون ان شاء الله اليوم من ميلان. في البداية نبي نتوقف باتصال سريع مع سعادة السفير الإيطالي في الكويت. نعم. مستر كارلو بالدوتشي.
نعم.
طيب تصور الاتصال جاهز. مستر امباسادور مستر كارلو بالدوتشي, good afternoon.
Morning.
Yes, could you please tell us first the situation in Italy?
Well, the situation in Italy is still very, very complex, and but Italy is reacting in the proper way. I think we are adopting a strategy which is working, and I'm not going to give you figures now because it doesn't make sense to give figures that are going to change every day. But I can tell you that the strategy chosen by the government is very well implemented at different level, starting from the regions, which are doing very fine. You know, it's a strategy which has personal limitations, which is necessary because we need to keep the people under control in a way that they don't provide the development of the virus. Then it's also kind of measures which are very costly in terms of economic activity. So this is something which is also significant for my country. But things are moving, and I think they're moving in a quite positive way at the moment.
Right. And how do you compare the measures there in Italy to the measures in Kuwait, you think?
You see, in Kuwait, things are different, of course, at the moment. So we don't have the urgency and the emergency existing in Italy, but the measures are not different. So the issues are personal limitation and economic cost of the measures.
Right.
Both of them are significant for Kuwait and for Italy.
Right.
Let me just tell you one point that I want to raise. I want to thank you, the government of Kuwait, which yesterday announced that they will give $5 million from the money they have provided to the WHO for the emergency in Italy. So we are very grateful for that. It's a very kind gesture of solidarity, and we will remember that for a long time. Thank you.
Right. Now, how is the situation with the embassy or the Italians in the region?
Yeah, you know, the embassies at the moment, and my embassy here in Kuwait is very much working and focusing on our nationals living in Kuwait. We try to provide them all the information they need on how things have to be done in Kuwait, how to help them to solve their aspect with the public authorities here in Kuwait. And of course, we keep very strongly in contact with them. And I think this is the same context all over the region, is almost similar. So we have a strong community here. They are very respected. They're good friends of Kuwait. Most of them are resident in the country. And of course, we also have a group of people who are waiting to come back to the country because they were stopped before re-entering into Kuwait. So we are working also to help them to arrive back to the country at the right moment when we will have the authorization to have them in Kuwait back.
Mr. Balducci, how many Italian approximately here in Kuwait?
Well, at the moment we have around 400 people.
400. Is there a plan that they will go back to Italy, or right now, I mean, they will stay here in Kuwait?
I think mainly they will stay in Kuwait. Normally what we try to say to all of them, and what the authorities from Italy ask us to tell them, is that they should stay in the country if they have a residence here in the country. Then if they don't have the residence in the country and they have a visa expiration problems or something similar, they of course they can return. We have already had a plane which went back to Italy last week with 35 Italians on board, and we didn't have any other further requests for the moment to go back to Italy.
Mr. Carlo Balducci, the Italian ambassador here in Kuwait, we are really glad to have you on this show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you.
طيب دكتور محمد، تقريبا احنا على وشك انه يكون الاتصال جاهز من ميلان مع بروفيسور بيرنو. باختصار كلمنا عن البروفيسور بيرنو.
طبعا البروفيسور يعمل في اهم الجامعات الايطاليه بالشمال المنكوبه في الاقليم، وهي جامعه ميلان، وهو بروفيسور علم الجراثيم هناك، وهو كذلك استشاري الفيروسات، علم الفيروسات الكلينيكي في المستشفى، ولديه ما يقارب 20,000 استشهاد بحثي. أنا أعتقد في العالم كله نادر ما تلقى أشخاص عندهم هذا الرقم من أعداد الاستشهادات البحثية، وهذا دليل على غزارة في الإنتاج البحثي. بعض من المجلات اللي نشر فيها أحد أعظم المجلات العالمية هي مجلة ساينس ومجلة النيتشر.
الاتصال جاهز؟ نعم. نبدأ ناخذ اتصالنا. Professor Carlo Bierno from Milan, good afternoon and good evening here in Kuwait.
Good afternoon.
We are glad to have you in this show. Let's start first, Professor Bierno, from Milan, the worst affected province in Italy, which is one of the worst affected in the world. Could you tell us first what's happening now in the epidemic?
Yeah, I'll try to give you as much information as I can, because the informations are coming on an everyday basis, and every day they will be certainly readapted and readjusted, because unfortunately the epidemics is still there and ongoing in Italy, even though it has changed so much. So far in Italy we have more or less 125,000 people infected, with about 15,000 deaths, so a substantial amount. Fortunately, we have already more than 21,000 people that were fully cured and returned to their normal activities. The rate of increase on a daily basis of the new infections is about 4%. 4% is nothing compared to the 2021, 25, 30% at the top. But still is about 4,000 or 5,000 people newly diagnosed every day. So the intensive care is a little bit less under pressure, because the number of beds that are occupied is reducing. Nevertheless, the epidemics, as I said, is still here. The number of cases is not reducing at the pace that we hoped and we want. That means that this virus is really infectious, and we still have to work a lot on that.
Now, we heard, Professor Bierno, that the Italian army was locking down villages as early as the 20th or the 22nd of February. So why did the situation go out of control?
The lockdown that occurred by the army was done after several days that the epidemics started. So let me try to explain very quickly. The SARS in 2003 was a typical epidemic of China and Southeast Asia that touched very marginally Italy, very marginally, and Europe and the rest of the world. When it arrived to the south of Lombardy, that is the south of Milan, it was not perceived as a major importance. But when the cases started to increase, then the army came and locked down the zone. But unfortunately, by then, due to the very, very high infectivity of the virus, the situation was already out of control. But I have to say that inside the red zone that is controlled by the army, we do not have new infections. So that means that the situation there is under control.
Professor Bierno, the mortality rate seems higher in Italy than other countries. What is the reason?
I think there is more than one reason. The easiest that I can tell you, but I have no evidence for that at all, that the virus here is more pathogenic than in other places. But I don't think this is the real answer. But we are studying it. We are trying to characterize the virus to understand at this point. I think the major reason is driven essentially by the excessive number of patients that occurred all together at the same time. The number of ventilator and emergency rooms available was not ready for the invasion of this huge number of people. Just to give you an idea, at April 4th, that is yesterday, we had only in Lombardy about 50,000 cases. And that means, and the majority of them required intensive care approach, and we had not enough because the number of intensive care units, as it is in Kuwait and in any other countries, is measured on the basis of the needs of the population. So this invasion found us not ready, unfortunately. That means that probably I would assume that not everyone had the chance to be treated with a ventilator properly. But there is another reason. Italy is a very old country. The average age for women for survival is 84, and for men is 80. So we have a huge amount of people very old that were infected by the virus, and at that time, unfortunately, the virus is merciless. it kills the large majority of them. So this is a major reason why we have such a high mortality.
But Professor Byrno, also, I mean, recently we are start hearing some news that this virus is affecting also not only the elder people, even the young people also.
You said correctly, affect. If you look at the curve of the infection, you see that the average age at infection is in the 50s. That means that the virus infects everyone, but the rate, the peak, the median of the death is beyond the 75. What does it mean? That everyone can be infected by this virus, including children, including young adults, etc., but those that pay a price in terms of life, loss of life, are the elderly. So there is a discrepancy between those that are infected and those that die. The difference is more than 20 years.
You mentioned, Professor, that the genotype in Italy could be more virulent and more aggressive. Now, what is the commonest genotype in Italy of the virus, and how many genotypes are there of this virus?
What I said is that this is something that we need to consider. As I said before, this is one of the hypotheses. I personally think that this is not the reason, because this virus changes it quite slowly. The first sequencing of the virus that has been done near Milan found the same virus as it was in China. So we would assume that at least at the beginning the epidemics was driven by the same virus as it was in China. We need to see now whether the virus has changed. There are some lines of research ongoing. In a couple of weeks we will have the answer.
Do you think this virus will become seasonal? And if it's going to be seasonal, do you think it will be less aggressive at that time?
Very good question. Indeed, it is 2 or 3 questions inside the question.
So, take your time.
In order to be seasonal, the virus needs to return. And the return is not like influenza that is regenerated every year in certain places of the world and invades the world. In this case, the assumption is that this virus can remain in some parts of the world. You know that this is a pandemic, so all the world is affected. So we might, just to give you an example, completely clean up the virus from Italy, totally, 0 infection, 0 new patients. Then we start again our life, and a patient, a tourist that comes from somewhere in the world might bring the virus back to Italy, and we will start again. So in this case, we might consider the hypothesis that the virus can be seasonal, but not because of season, but because of return driven by the traveling throughout the world. But we need to consider one point that might be very relevant for you in Kuwait.
Yeah.
That the virus at this point is preferentially infecting and traveling throughout the temperate region. That is around the latitude 40 and 50 of the world. It seems to affect everywhere in the world, but not with the same strength. So in other words, it appears that in a relatively cold weather, the virus is in better conditions than in a high heat. So it will be very interesting for a country like yours, that in which you have a climate very dry and hot, whether the virus will arrive and at which strength.
Right. Now, we can get as hot as 50 degrees and 55 in the summer, Celsius. So, but I know that there is some conflict between experts in which, in the middle of the pandemic, temperature can affect this virus. Are you hopeful about that?
Yeah, you're right. There is a conflict, nearly a war. Data need to be balanced between temperature, humidity, and the time. So sometimes we consider only one of these parameters. The virus does not like temperatures very high. For example, at 56 degrees, it is completely killed in a few minutes.
Right.
So, and particularly in the dry conditions, as it is typical for every virus, it suffers.
Right.
So I would assume that the heat, the outside heat, typical of your region, would not make this virus very happy. At the same time, however, you use a lot of air conditioning as everywhere in our countries. So under these conditions, at 20 degrees, the virus might survive longer. So we need to consider both the situation, the external environment and the internal environment.
So you suggest cutting down air conditioning in the summer then?
No, it's very easy. It's very easy to say so from here. So no, I'm not saying so. What I'm saying is only that the virus is essentially transferring itself from a person to person always. He is very infectious, probably the most infectious virus we have ever seen.
Really?
If it doesn't transmit from person to person, it dies. So the point is not to turn out the air conditioning, as you said, joking, but to try inside the houses to avoid the close contacts. Because the virus needs to be transmitted from person to person.
By the way, Professor Bيرنو, can this virus be transmitted by air or with talking?
Definitely yes, because it is transmitted by breathing. But the breathing, coughing, sneezing, talking are all the same. Different words to say the same thing. We are emitting particles that contain the virus. So if we stay in a room with someone infected for an hour, we have a very, very high chances to be infected, even if the person doesn't cough. So the air in this way might be considered as a way of transmitting the virus. But if you talk about the open air outside, I would say definitely not.
Right. Now, what are the vaccine news? Do you expect the first vaccine to come out? And which vaccine do you think would be the best?
In terms of vaccines, the scientific world has done incredible things in the past, but as you know, we search for about 4 years a vaccine for HIV, no success, for HCV, no success. So I think in order to have an idea of whether and when the vaccine will be available, we need to know a little bit more about the virus. We do not need so much about its variability, so we need to study more. I can tell you that some vaccines, candidate vaccines, are already under experimentation, and we will see how it goes. But I would expect that at minimum 1 year would be necessary if it is enough.
Now, what about treatment, for the virus? And is there any prophylaxis, like a prophylactic medication that we can give exposed people in order to prevent the actual infection?
These are two key questions, because when you do not have a vaccine, you do have to go for a treatment or prophylaxis, no doubts about that. Regarding treatment, we do not have any specific drug so far for this coronavirus. However, there is a substantial evidence that some drugs designed for other RNA plus virus, like coronavirus, have efficacy against the SARS-CoV-2. So, and these are the drugs that we use in clinical practice to treat our patients. The first results that are coming in the literature are quite promising. So I might assume that in a relatively short time, we should have enough data to say that the patients can be treated with antiviral drugs properly. At the same time, use the same drugs for prophylaxis. I think it is a little bit hazardous because, for example, chloroquine, that is a drug that has been proposed for prophylaxis, like it is for malaria. It is a toxic drug. So sometimes in order to get protected by something, you can get sick for something else. So at this point, we do not have any evidence that any prophylactic agent is convenient to be used in practice. While for antiretrovirals, we are in relatively good shape.
Now, there is a report today from New York that the BCG vaccine is giving some protection for patients. Have you come across that? This
issue is coming out continuously. Vaccine against flu, vaccine against tuberculosis, that is a BCG, or anything else. Everything that makes the lungs stronger and with a natural immunity strong would protect in some way against coronavirus. But this protection is aspecific, not specific, because every vaccine works against its own antigen, that is against its own pathogen. So I cannot believe that BCG per se can be protective against coronavirus. However, if the immune system of the lungs is stimulated properly to be ready against the attack of coronavirus, and we have a good system to do so, that might be useful. And this is something that needs to be pursued.
Professor Byrno, regarding the wearing the mask, so many confusion answers. Recently, maybe you heard President Donald Trump that he mentioned it's not that necessary to wear the mask, at least for himself. So must we wear masks?
If you want to have a very neat and honest answer from the medical point of view, the answer is absolutely yes. The transmission of this virus is totally and completely driven by the contact from person to person. If you wear mask, you reduce the chance that enough virus ends to another person, or by contrast, that you are reached by the virus released by someone else. So in other words, the masks are today the best system to protect ourselves and the people surrounding us. So those that say I will not wear a mask, I hope that they have enough reasons to say so.
Now, could you share with us any positive news from this pandemic?
There are good promising news and bad promising news. So let me try to balance the two. The only bad promising news is that this virus is stronger than we expected. And it will take a long time to eliminate it, and hopefully it will not return. So we need to be ready to fight it, not only now, but maybe in the future. The good news is that we are learning so much, and if it will come again, we know how to treat it, we know how to cope with it. But there is something else important. This virus has changed our life in Italy. And it is the same in other countries, but in Italy particularly. We learned how to stay inside, we learned how to change our life, we learned also to use better our time. It seems to be irrelevant, but this is very important. Our country is a country that runs continuously. We are learning to slow down because of the virus. Hopefully, this new attitude of life will remain, and this will be a good news for us.
Right. It makes you prioritize time better for other things in life other than work, probably.
Correct.
Professor Byrno, you mentioned bad news. It's going to take a long time. How long do you think it's going to take?
It depends what we will do. This is not a behavioral virus. That is, AIDS is a behavioral virus, so you will get it under certain behaviors. This is not as such. However, if we remain completely free to circulate, to go around and to do whatever we like, the virus will be transmitting from one person to the other, and the epidemics will remain for a very long time. By contrast, if a vaccine will be found and will be effective, the vaccination of the people will be certainly the best system to prevent its further circulation. So mostly depends on what will happen in the future. My perception is that in Italy we will be out in some months, but it might return. At the same time, it might stay longer for other countries and might touch other countries that are not touched today. It will be important to know, for example, for your desertic area, whether you have to care about it, or it will be not very, very relevant. But it's very important what you are doing. You are caring now. We had to care after the virus entered. While caring now for you, this will be of paramount importance to prevent its arrival and so live better than what we are doing today.
So as an expert, you think, I mean, it's gonna stay the same situation at least for the next 6 months?
If you talk about worldwide, I'm afraid so. If you talk about specific countries and specific areas, it will be different. For example, those that started earlier, such as China, Japan, Korea, Italy, unfortunately, will be the first to get out. But others will start. So if you look in a general the world, I would say that several months are required to cope with that. But the difference will be from country to country. So our country hopefully will be among the first to get out, but it might return for the reasons that we said before.
Hopefully all the countries will get out soon. Professor Carlo Bierno from Milan, we really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Goodbye.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye bye.
يعني ما ادري من وين راح ابدا معاك دكتور محمد، بس في كلام ايجابي يمكن قاله دكتور البروفيسور بيرنو، بس ايضا مره ثانيه تاكيده على الكلام ان الموضوع راح يستمر الى اشهر.
نعم.
البعض للاسف قاعد يعتقد ان الموضوع راح ياخذ اسابيع وينتهي، لكن كل العلماء على الاقل اللي قاعدين نستضيفهم، كل الدكاتره اللي قاعد نستضيفهم برا، سواء اللي في كندا واللي في امريكا والان في ميلان، الكل قاعد يؤكد على ان الموضوع راح ياخذ اشهر. المتفائل قاعد يقول راح ياخذ 6 شهور، والمتشائم قاعد يقول راح يوصل الى سنه تقريبا. نحتاج اكثر ان نستوعب حقيقه خطوره الوضع اللي احنا فيه. عدل؟
نعم، يعني اعتقد هو ذكر ان الفيروس هذا اخطر من ما كنا نتوقع من ناحيه سرعه الانتشار، اسرع في الانتشار مما كنا نتوقع، المعلومات تتغير عنا يوميا، فهذه نقطه مهمه ان اسرع مما كنا نتصور. كذلك لمح على شغله ان كل دوله راح تدش بهالنفق اللي دشت فيه ايطاليا، فالدول اللي بدا معاها الفيروس قبل ايطاليا او مع ايطاليا اللي هي الصين واليابان كوريا وايطاليا راح تخلص اول من الفيروس، بس كل دوله راح تاخذ حاصلها من الدخول في هذا النفق. لو تذكر مع البروفيسور بوغوش من كندا قال ان احنا كل اللي قاعد نسوي ان ناخر، فكل ما اخرنا عدد الحالات، قللنا عدد الحالات اليوميه، كل ما انظمتنا الصحيه استطاعت ان تتاقلم. فهذا اللي احنا قاعد نسويه، احنا مو قاعد صعب ان نوصل لدرجه 0 او ل0 من الحالات. كذلك ذكر انه ممكن راح يرجع مره ثانيه عن طريق السفر، يعني حتى لو انت تسوي كنترول عليه ممكن مره ثانيه يرجع وياك، فلازم تضع خطه طويله الامد بحيث ان توازن بين الصراع مع هذا الفيروس والصراع مع الحياه اليوميه.
بس يعني يمكن واحده من على الاقل فيما يخص منطقتنا يعني على الاقل تعطينا دفعه امل ان دائما اللي احنا كنا نتذمر من موسم الصيف، احنا الحين ناطرين موسم الصيف
وعسى ان تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير
لكم. ناطرين موسم الصيف يوصل، وناطرين شهر 7 و8 على احر من الجمر انه يوصلون بسرعه عشان الجو. بس
خوف الحين يسمعون الكلام يقصون عن الكهرباء يقطون عن الكهرباء بالصيف.
لا الحين الجو زين برا. عموما يعني ان شاء الله كانت حلقه مفيده اليوم. نعم. وخصوصا سلطنا الضوء على ميلان وايطاليا تعتبر واحده من اكثر المناطق على مستوى العالم تضررا.
انت قاعد تتكلم عن يمكن أسوأ بقعه جغرافيه صغيره في العالم. رقم 1
اللي هي الاكثر تضررا،
وقاعد تكلم واحد من اكبر الخبراء في هذه البقعه،
فان شاء الله نكون قدمنا ايضا فيها ماده مفيده للساده المشاهدين. الاستاذ المشارك في كليه الطب دكتور محمد جمال، كل شكر لك.
شكرا لك استاذ عمار.
شكر موصول لكم مشاهدينا الكرام. كذي نكون احنا انهينا حلقه اليوم. مره ثانيه وثالثه ورابعه وخامسه وسادسه ناكد على ضروره ان نتبع تعليمات وزاره الصحه. يا جماعه الموضوع لا زال مستمر، نحتاج نكون حريصين اكثر ونحتاط أكثر وأكثر وأكثر. ما نبي نخرعكم، ما نبي نخوفكم، بس نقول لكم الاحتياط هو السبيل الأول للوقاية من انتشار هذا الفيروس. الله يحفظكم من كل شر إن شاء الله. ديروا بالكم، نشوفكم على خير وفي أمان الله.